Hey guys, my name is Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with FL Studio. So today's video is on reverb, and it kind of goes off of last week's video, which was talking about delays and how it's just repeating a sound after a certain amount of delay. Now a reverb is very much the same premise you'll find. I'm going to turn down the diffusion here before I let you listen to it so you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. So if you listen here, this is what it sounds like. So it sounds like a very fast delay, and you know there's nothing really different from this and what we looked at last time in terms of delay. When you just had the delay really fast, it basically sounded like this. And now, on the other hand, there is something slightly different you might notice, and it kind of sounds like it's bigger. It doesn't sound like it's just repeating it really fast down the center. I'll show you briefly. If I get our fruity delay 2, and then make the time really quick. And I'm going to turn down the volume as well because that makes it a bit more closer to what we're working with now. So that's pretty close. And then if we listen to this one again, it sounds a bit more like it's, far left and far right, like it's in stereo, wide and spacious. And that's what reverbs do. So now I'm going to turn up the diffusion here, and you'll hear the true sound of a reverb. And this is what reverbs typically sound like. It sounds like you're in a hall, basically. Now you could change this. I'll go through some of the parameters here so you can look at those and learn what they do. But this is basically a way to get it so it sounds like you're inside some sort of room or some sort of space. And it just kind of adds a sense of depth to your sound. So first of all, we have the obvious ones, high cut and low cut. These are just going to be filtering our sound before it goes through. We've already seen quite a few of these. That makes it brighter because the high cut's all the way up, low cut's all the way down, so that one gets rid of, that doesn't, yeah, this one doesn't do anything right now, but if we turn this up, it thins it out. Sweet. So that's what those two do. Mid and side is not that big of a deal. It just kind of questions whether or not it keeps, it kind of gets your stereo sound and deals with it, or if you just have a mono sound. And if those don't mean that much to you, then you probably shouldn't worry about it. Just leave it to the default. But when in doubt, you could just click it, swap it around, see which one you like better, which one has a nicer sound for what you're doing in that particular case. But without further ado, the other stuff. So this is our pre-delay. Now what the pre-delay does is it basically allows us to pause before we start the reverb. Now, as it is cool for just a regular effect, there are some practical applications for this. What we can do is, if you listen right now, it kind of just sounds like the reverb and the original note are just layered on top of each other. But if we turn this up just a tiny bit, it still sounds like that, but a little less so, because what happens is if you look at this note, we have normally with no pre-delay, the reverb starts as soon as the audio starts, and we start to get some sort of response from the reverb unit up until this ends, and then the reverb will trail off and kind of finish up its job. But on the other hand, if we have a pre-delay, what it does, it doesn't start playing back the reverb until we hit a certain pre-delay amount. So that means we could actually let the original sound kind of poke through the reverb a bit more. So we have this pause and then the reverb kicks in. So even though it doesn't sound like there's a gap between them, we've kind of let the first part go through. So if you feel like your sounds are kind of being blended together with your reverb, chances are you want to add a bit of a pre-delay to it. Now, this T here just kind of lets you choose if it's tempo based. So if you look in the, unfortunately it doesn't really show you top left corner what it's really doing. But it kind of lets you have it lets you base it off the tempo that your project is currently in. So that's that. And now we have the size. This will basically change the characteristics of the tone of your reverb. I kind of like that sound. And our diffusion here is, we already showed it a little bit. Just how much do we want it to sound like it's slapping around the room? If we have it really low, it sounds like it's bouncing around a small space. If we open it up more, it sounds like we're kind of in a, wider space. Yeah. So that's basically what that one does. Now, we have our bass, our decay, cross, and dampening. Now, crossover, for the life of me, I think that one just has to do with, it's tied to dampening. Not 100% sure. We'll figure that one out in a second. But I don't use crossover that much. I probably should, but realistically, I don't like this reverb unit anyway. So I'm not too worried about getting things to sound like great in it because I don't like it to begin with. But anyway, we have our bass here, and this is basically the pun, going to increase the amount of bass we have in our reverb. You notice there it kind of thins things out a little bit. So yeah, you can mess with that one if you want. Otherwise, you could just EQ the reverb itself using high cut, low cut, stuff like that. But the decay here is how long we want the reverb to be. Cool. So that means your best friends are probably going to be decay, size, and dampening. What does dampening do? Dampening is kind of like a high cut, but it's a little bit different if you listen to it. So what it kind of does is it not only does it like filter off some of the high end when you have it down here, but it also kind of makes the reverb sound shorter as well. So that it's basically like, if you're in a room with a bunch of padding on the walls, sound will have a much harder time bouncing around than if you just have like concrete walls. So that's kind of what that does. It changes the characteristic of the tone, and it also changes the duration a little bit. So that's basically what that does. Now, I think crossover is tied to dampening. Yeah, whatever. I don't remember if it's like... Maybe it's tied to bass. I can't remember. But realistically, I've never used this. It's never been something I cared enough to mess with. And, that probably means you don't need to worry too much about it, just because I've been producing for a while. You could check out my accounts on SoundCloud or some of the stuff I post on this YouTube account to hear the stuff that I do, and, take it with a grain of salt. But if I say it's not really useful, then it just means in my experience with producing, with how far I've gotten, I haven't really found it to be all that amazing. So yeah, you can mess with it if it does what you want it to do. Great, feel free to use it. But otherwise, don't worry about it. It's probably not something that'll make that big of an impact. Oh, okay. So that covers most of the tools here. Now we have this small spot over here. This is stereo separation. You can mess with this one if you want. It just kind of does weird things to your. I'll show you. Quite frankly, I would not use it. I don't like what it does with the reverb. But you may want to use it eventually, who knows. And then we have our final spot here, which is our dry, which if you recall, dry is the untreated sound, wet is the affected sound, and ER is something kind of in between. It's like a dry version, but kind of stretched out across the left and the right sides. And then wet is just our regular reverb. So you can mess around a whole bunch to get different sounds. Like for instance, if you go to the drum room preset here, you'll notice it sounds very much like a small room. But if you go to a large hall, sounds like you're in a humongous hall. So there's a lot of flexibility of this. Now that said, each reverb plugin has its own tone. I happen to not like the tone that Fruity Reverb has, which is why I don't use it so often. Now, if you ask me what I use as an alternate, typically my synthesizers are in SynthMaster when I'm using FL Studio, and SynthMaster has a built-in reverb plugin that sounds a lot nicer. So I tend to use that more than I tend to use, so if you see here, it has a reverb plugin right here, and I tend to use that one a lot more than I use this one. But I'm sure you could find online somewhere some free alternate reverbs that you could use with FL Studio. But otherwise, this one's pretty good. Additionally, there is, if you go to Effector here, it actually has a reverb plugin inside of it as well. And then we'll off, and you can kind of shape it by just moving this around. Now, to be honest, I really like the reverb in Effector. It sounds a lot better than the one. I mean, even if it's the same one as in terms of like how it was actually designed, this one just sounds a lot nicer, a lot easier than this one. This one, it seems like you have to do a lot of tuning just to get a nice sound. And I really don't like that. It's kind of hard to get a good sound right off the bat with some quick settings here. So that said, if you want a quick reverb to slap on your track, then you might just want to hop into Effector here. And just kind of mess around with some of the settings there. Just settings, I say, but really it's just this panel here. And that'll just give you a chance to you know, have a quick reverb that sounds nice without having to worry too much about the other things. So that's reverbs in a nutshell. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Hopefully you learned something. But anyway, I think the next video I'm going to be talking about some modulation. And modulation is, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's still the same idea as delay and volume. And that's basically what you're going to be thinking about. But it is kind of, the sound you get is very, very different. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.